The sun was setting over Washington, D.C., painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The city buzzed with its usual energy, cars honking, people rushing home after long days at work, and the distant hum of conversations filling the air. But beneath this everyday rhythm, something unusual was about to unfold. It was an event that would shock not only those who witnessed it, but also the entire nation. FBI Director Marcus Thompson sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel as he drove through the quieter streets near Capitol Hill. He had just finished a late meeting at FBI headquarters, where discussions about national security and law enforcement reform had dominated the agenda. Normally, Marcus traveled with a security detail, but tonight, he'd decided to drive himself. He wanted some time alone to think, away from the constant presence of agents and aides. Little did he know this simple decision would lead to one of the most unforgettable nights of his life. As Marcus turned onto a dimly lit street, he noticed flashing blue and red lights in his rearview mirror. A police cruiser had pulled up behind him, its siren blaring briefly before falling silent. Confused but calm, Marcus slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. He rolled down his window and waited, assuming it was a routine traffic stop. Maybe he hadn't signaled properly or had unknowingly broken some minor rule. Whatever it was, he wasn't worried. He was confident he hadn't done anything wrong. Moments later, a tall officer stepped out of the cruiser. His nameplate read Hayes, and his demeanor was anything but friendly. Hayes approached Marcus's car with an aggressive stride, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered gun. "License and registration," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Marcus nodded politely, reaching into his pocket for his wallet and then leaning toward the glove compartment to retrieve the vehicle's papers. But instead of looking at the documents, Hayes stared at Marcus with narrowed eyes. "You think you're special because you're dressed fancy?" he sneered, his tone dripping with contempt. Marcus froze, startled by the accusation. He was wearing a tailored suit, true, but that was standard attire for someone in his position. Before he could respond, Hayes continued, "I see guys like you all the time acting like you own the place." Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't about a traffic violation, it was something deeper, uglier. As a black man, he was no stranger to prejudice, but he never expected to face it in such a blatant way, especially as the head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Still, he kept his composure, knowing that reacting emotionally would only make things worse. "Officer," he said calmly, "I'm happy to provide my ID if you'd like to verify my identity." Hayes ignored him, his expression hardening further. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his hand now firmly gripping the handle of his baton. Marcus hesitated for a split second, then complied, opening the door slowly and stepping onto the pavement. He raised his hands slightly, palms open, to show he posed no threat. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, his voice steady despite the rising tension. Instead of answering, Hayes grabbed Marcus's arm roughly and spun him around, slamming him against the car. The metal was cold against Marcus's cheek, and the force of the impact knocked the wind out of him. "Don't act innocent with me," Hayes growled, yanking Marcus's arms behind his back and snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. Pain shot through Marcus's shoulders, but he bit back a cry, determined not to give Hayes the satisfaction of seeing him break. By now, a small crowd had begun to gather on the sidewalk. Some passers-by stopped to watch, while others filmed the scene on their phones. One woman shouted, "That's the FBI director." Her voice carried across the street, drawing murmurs of disbelief from those nearby. Hayes glanced around, clearly annoyed by the attention, but unwilling to let go of his authority. "Shut up," he snapped at the woman, though his grip on Marcus loosened slightly. Despite the chaos, Marcus remained focused. He knew he had two choices: escalate the situation or find a way to defuse it. Choosing the latter, he spoke in a measured tone, addressing Hayes directly. "Officer, I am FBI Director Marcus Thompson. You can confirm my identity by calling headquarters. There's been a misunderstanding here." For a moment, Hayes seemed uncertain, his bravado faltering under the weight of Marcus's words. But pride, or perhaps fear of being exposed, took over, and he tightened the handcuffs again. "Save it for the station," he muttered, dragging Marcus toward the patrol car. As Hayes shoved Marcus into the back seat, another police cruiser screeched to a halt beside them. Out stepped Officer Lisa Chen, a young Asian American woman with a reputation for fairness and professionalism. She had been patrolling the area when she received a dispatch call about a disturbance involving a high-profile individual. Sensing the gravity of the situation, she approached cautiously, her hand hovering near her holster. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice firm yet controlled. Hayes glared at her, clearly irritated by the interruption. "This doesn't concern you, Chen," he spat. "Go back to your beat." But Lisa didn't back down. She noticed the swelling bruise forming on Marcus's temple and the stiffness in his posture. Something wasn't right. Ignoring Hayes's protests, she activated her body camera and began recording the interaction. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked Marcus, her tone softening. Marcus nodded weakly, grateful for her intervention. Lisa's arrival changed everything. With her camera rolling, Hayes became visibly uneasy, his earlier arrogance replaced by nervous fidgeting. Realizing he was losing control of the narrative, he tried to justify his actions. "This guy was resisting arrest," he claimed, pointing accusingly at Marcus. But Lisa wasn't convinced. She radioed for backup, ensuring that the incident would be thoroughly documented. By the time additional officers arrived, word of what was happening had spread rapidly, thanks to the videos circulating on social media. Back at FBI headquarters, news of the altercation reached top officials within minutes. Phones rang off the hook as agents scrambled to piece together what had happened to their director. Attorney General Patricia Lane, a close ally of Marcus, wasted no time in intervening. She contacted local authorities, demanding answers and accountability. Meanwhile, outraged citizens took to Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, sharing footage of the arrest and calling for justice. Hashtags like Justice for Marcus and the End Police Brutality trended nationwide, sparking heated debates about racism and abuse of power. By midnight, the story had exploded into a full-blown crisis. News anchors interrupted regular programming to report on the unfolding drama, speculating about the implications for law enforcement and civil rights. Protesters gathered outside police stations across the country, holding signs that read, "Black Eye, Lives Matter," and chanting slogans demanding change. Politicians issued statements condemning Hayes's actions, while advocacy groups called for systemic reforms to prevent similar incidents in the future. Amid the chaos, one thing was clear. Deputy Richard Hayes's career was over. Investigators reviewed Lisa's body cam footage, along with witness testimonies, and quickly concluded that Hayes had acted out of line. Charges were filed against him for assault, unlawful detention, and violating civil rights. Within 48 hours, Hayes was arrested and hauled off to jail, his face plastered across every major news outlet. The swift response sent a powerful message that no one, not even a police officer, was above the law. For Marcus, the ordeal was far from over. Though he was released unharmed, the experience left a lasting impact. He couldn't shake the memory of being treated like a criminal simply because of the color of his skin. But rather than retreat into anger or despair, Marcus channeled his emotions into action. He vowed to use his platform to push for meaningful change, starting with initiatives to improve relations between law enforcement and minority communities. And as he stood before reporters days later, flanked by Lisa Chen, he delivered a message of hope and resilience. "We cannot undo the past, but we can build a better future, one step at a time." The days following the arrest of FBI Director Marcus Thompson became a whirlwind of emotions, investigations, and public outcry. The incident had ignited a firestorm that spread far beyond Washington, D.C., capturing the attention of millions across the country. News outlets ran nonstop coverage, dissecting every detail of what had happened. Social media platforms were flooded with reactions, some expressing shock and outrage, others defending the officer involved. But one thing was undeniable. This was more than just an isolated event. It was a reflection of deeper societal issues that refused to be ignored. As the morning sun rose over the Capitol, Marcus sat in his office at FBI headquarters, staring blankly at stacks of case files scattered across his desk. Despite being physically unharmed, he felt drained, as though the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. He replayed the events of the previous night in his mind, the harsh words, the rough handling, the cold metal of the handcuffs digging into his wrists. Each memory brought a fresh wave of frustration and disbelief. How could something like this happen? And why did it feel so familiar? But Marcus wasn't alone in his struggle. Across town, Officer Lisa Chen wrestled with her own thoughts. After intervening during the altercation, she had become an overnight sensation, hailed as a hero for standing up against injustice. Yet the spotlight made her uneasy. She hadn't acted out of a desire for recognition. She had simply done what she believed was right. Now, reporters camped outside her precinct, eager to interview the brave young officer who had dared to challenge a superior. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family, and even strangers thanking her for her courage. But amidst the praise, Lisa couldn't shake the image of Deputy Richard Hayes's face when he realized he was being recorded. There was fear in his eyes, a glimpse of vulnerability that reminded her how fragile power could be. Meanwhile, Deputy Hayes found himself in a very different situation. Arrested mere hours after the incident, he was now locked in a cell at the local detention center, awaiting formal charges. For a man accustomed to wielding authority, the experience was humbling and terrifying. The other inmates recognized him instantly, thanks to the endless loop of news broadcasts showing his mugshot. Some jeered at him, calling him a disgrace to law enforcement, while others offered sympathetic nods, knowing all too well what it felt like to lose control. Hayes spent most of his time pacing back and forth, replaying the events in his head. Had he gone too far, or had he simply been doing his job only to be blindsided by political correctness and public pressure? Back in the real world, the fallout continued to grow. Protesters gathered outside police stations nationwide, holding signs that read, "No justice, no peace," and demanding accountability for officers who abused their power. In cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, marches turned into rallies, drawing thousands of participants from diverse backgrounds. Young activists took to megaphones, urging crowds to channel their anger into action. "This isn't just about one bad cop," one speaker declared. "It's about a system that allows racism and brutality to thrive unchecked." Politicians scrambled to respond to the growing unrest. Senators and representatives held emergency meetings debating potential reforms to address systemic issues within law enforcement. Some proposed stricter oversight measures such as mandatory body cameras for all officers and independent review boards to investigate misconduct. Others suggested reallocating funds from police departments to community programs aimed at reducing crime through education and economic opportunities. While these discussions sparked hope among advocates for change, skeptics argued that talk was cheap unless accompanied by concrete action. In the midst of this chaos, Attorney General Patricia Lane emerged as a key figure. Known for her no-nonsense approach and commitment to justice, she wasted no time in addressing the crisis head-on. Within 24 hours of the incident, she announced the formation of a special task force dedicated to investigating allegations of racial profiling and excessive force within law enforcement agencies. "We cannot stand idly by while trust between communities and those sworn to protect them continues to erode," she stated during a press conference. "Change must come, and it must come now." Lane also personally oversaw the prosecution of Deputy Hayes, ensuring that the case moved forward without delay. Evidence against him mounted quickly, thanks in large part to Lisa Chen's body cam footage. Prosecutors presented damning clips showing Hayes escalating the situation unnecessarily, using derogatory language and resorting to physical violence despite Marcus's compliance. Witnesses corroborated these accounts, describing how Hayes seemed intent on asserting dominance rather than maintaining order. By the end of the week, Hayes faced multiple charges, including assault, unlawful imprisonment, and violating civil rights. Public reaction remained divided. Many celebrated the swift response, viewing it as proof that accountability was possible, even for those in positions of power. "Finally, someone is holding these officers responsible," said one Twitter user. "Maybe this will send a message to others." Others, however, questioned whether punishing one individual would truly make a difference. "One guilty verdict doesn't fix a broken system," argued a commentator on CNN. "Until we tackle the root causes of racism and inequality, incidents like this will keep happening." Despite the polarized opinions, there was a sense of cautious optimism in certain quarters. Community leaders saw an opportunity to push for long-term solutions. They organized forums and town hall meetings, inviting residents, activists, and law enforcement officials to engage in open dialogue. At one such gathering in Washington, D.C., Marcus Thompson delivered a heartfelt speech. Standing before a packed auditorium, he spoke candidly about his experience and the need for unity. "What happened to me was not unique," he admitted. "Countless individuals have endured similar treatment, or worse, simply because of the color of their skin. But tonight I ask you to focus not on anger but on action. Let us work together to create a future where everyone feels safe and respected." His words resonated deeply, earning applause from the audience. Among those listening intently was Lisa Chen, who had attended the event to show her support. Inspired by Marcus's call to action, she approached him afterward to discuss ways they could collaborate. Together, they brainstormed ideas for training programs designed to promote empathy and cultural sensitivity among officers. They envisioned workshops led by experts in psychology and sociology, along with role-playing exercises to help officers understand the perspectives of marginalized groups. Their shared vision marked the beginning of a partnership that would shape the future of policing in America. As weeks passed, life slowly began to return to normal, or as close to normal as possible under the circumstances. Marcus resumed his duties as FBI director, though he carried the scars of that fateful night with him. Every decision he made, every policy he implemented, was informed by his experience. He became a vocal advocate for reform, using his influence to push for changes that extended beyond law enforcement. From advocating for affordable housing initiatives to supporting educational programs in underserved communities, Marcus left no stone unturned in his quest for justice. Lisa, too, embraced her newfound role as a champion for accountability. Promoted to detective shortly after the incident, she dedicated herself to mentoring rookie officers, instilling in them the values of integrity and compassion. She often reflected on the events of that night, reminding herself how easily things could have gone differently if she hadn't intervened. This awareness fueled her determination to make a difference, not just in her department but in the broader fight for equality. For Deputy Hayes, the consequences of his actions were severe. Convicted on all counts, he received a prison sentence of 3 years without parole, a rare outcome that underscored the seriousness of his crimes. As he was led away in handcuffs, cameras flashing around him, Hayes appeared resigned to his fate. Whether he truly understood the gravity of what he had done remained unclear, but his punishment served as a stark reminder that no one was above the law. While justice had been served in this particular case, the battle for systemic change was far from over. Debates raged on about the best ways to address institutional racism and rebuild trust between law enforcement and minority communities. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, glimmers of hope persisted. Young people inspired by Marcus and Lisa's courage joined forces, organizing grassroots movements and pushing for legislative reforms. Even skeptical politicians found themselves compelled to listen, introducing bills aimed at increasing transparency and accountability in policing. Years later, historians would look back on this moment as a turning point, a rare instance where power dynamics shifted in favor of accountability. Textbooks chronicled the events in detail, highlighting the courage of individuals like Marcus and Lisa who refused to stay silent. Their names became synonymous with the fight for justice, inspiring generations to come. Yet even as society moved forward, questions lingered. Was one victory enough to dismantle centuries-old systems of oppression? Could trust truly be rebuilt? between communities and those sworn to protect them. These uncertainties underscored the complexity of the journey ahead. The aftermath of the FBI director's arrest at Gunpoint continued to ripple across the nation, stirring emotions and sparking debates that refused to die down. What had started as a shocking incident on a quiet street in Washington, D.C., had morphed into a national reckoning, a moment that forced Americans to confront uncomfortable truths about race, power, and accountability. For Marcus Thompson, the ordeal was far from over. Though he had returned to his duties as FBI director, the scars of that night lingered, not just physically, but emotionally. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw not just a leader, but also a symbol of resilience, a man who had endured humiliation and emerged stronger. Marcus wasn't alone in carrying the weight of what had happened. Across the country, people were grappling with their own feelings about the case. In living rooms, classrooms, and workplaces, conversations erupted about privilege, prejudice, and justice. Social media buzzed with hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "End Racism in Blue," while news anchors debated the implications of the incident during primetime broadcasts. Some praised Marcus for his composure under pressure, calling him a hero for remaining calm despite the hostility he faced. Others argued that his status as FBI director shielded him from even worse treatment. What if he had been an ordinary citizen? These questions hung heavy in the air, fueling discussions that transcended geography and demographics. Meanwhile, Officer Lisa Chen found herself thrust into the spotlight in ways she never anticipated. Her decision to intervene during the altercation had earned her widespread recognition, but fame brought its own challenges. Reporters camped outside her precinct, eager to capture sound bites about her bravery. Friends and family bombarded her with messages, some congratulatory, others cautionary. "Be careful," one relative warned. "You don't want to make enemies in this line of work." But Lisa didn't care about making enemies. She cared about doing what was right. She knew that staying silent would have been easier, safer even. But silence wasn't an option, not when lives depended on speaking up. Lisa's actions inspired others to take a stand. Within days of the incident, videos surfaced online showing officers stepping in to prevent colleagues from abusing their power. One clip showed a sheriff in Texas pulling aside a deputy who had shouted racial slurs at a suspect. Another depicted a patrol officer in Chicago refusing to participate in an unlawful search. These acts of defiance, though small, signaled a shift, a growing awareness that systemic change required collective effort. Lisa became a beacon of hope for those seeking reform, proof that courage could ripple outward and inspire others to act. But while heroes emerged, so did villains. Deputy Richard Hayes, now behind bars, became the face of everything wrong with law enforcement. His mugshot appeared on billboards, protest signs, and memes, often accompanied by captions like, "This is what racism looks like." Inside prison, Hayes struggled to adapt to his new reality. Once a figure of authority, he was now just another inmate, stripped of his badge and dignity. Fellow prisoners taunted him, calling him names like "cop out" and "trigger happy." Guards treated him with disdain, refusing to offer the same courtesies they extended to other inmates. Hayes spent most of his time alone, replaying the events of that fateful night in his mind. Had he gone too far? Or had he simply been a pawn in a larger game sacrificed to appease public outrage? Outside the prison walls, Hayes's family grappled with shame and anger. His wife Sarah defended him fiercely, insisting that he was being unfairly targeted because of his uniform. "He made a mistake, sure," she told reporters during a tearful interview. "But does that mean he deserves to rot in jail? He's a good man who got caught up in something bigger than himself." Their two children, ages 10 and 13, struggled to understand why their father was suddenly vilified. At school, classmates teased them relentlessly, chanting rhymes about cops and criminals. The once close-knit family unraveled under the weight of public scrutiny, retreating into isolation as friends and neighbors distanced themselves. As the legal proceedings against Hayes unfolded, details emerged that painted a troubling picture of his past. Investigators uncovered a pattern of misconduct stretching back years. Complaints of racial profiling, excessive force, and verbal abuse filed by citizens who claimed they'd been mistreated during routine stops. Many of these complaints had gone unaddressed, dismissed as baseless or exaggerated. Now they served as damning evidence in court, bolstering the prosecution's case. Prosecutors argued that Hayes's behavior was not an isolated incident but part of a broader culture of impunity within law enforcement. Defense attorneys countered that Hayes was being scapegoated, a convenient target for a society desperate to assign blame. The trial captivated the nation, drawing comparisons to high-profile cases involving police brutality. Courtrooms overflowed with spectators, forcing officials to set up overflow areas where attendees could watch live streams of the proceedings. Journalists jockeyed for space, scribbling notes furiously as witnesses took the stand. Among them was Marcus Thompson himself, who recounted the events of that night with remarkable poise. When asked how he felt about Hayes's actions, Marcus paused before answering. "Betrayed," he said finally. Not just by him, but by a system that allowed someone like him to operate unchecked. Lisa Chen also testified, her body cam footage serving as pivotal evidence. As clips played on a large screen in the courtroom, jurors watched in stunned silence as Hayes escalated the situation unnecessarily, ignoring pleas from both Marcus and bystanders. Lisa described her decision to intervene, explaining that she couldn't stand idly by while an innocent man was mistreated. Her testimony earned her a standing ovation from the gallery, though she remained visibly uncomfortable with the attention. By the time closing arguments concluded, the verdict seemed inevitable. After just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all counts. Cheers erupted outside the courthouse as news spread, with protesters chanting, "Justice served." Hayes was sentenced to 3 years in prison without parole, a rare outcome that underscored the severity of his crimes. Attorney General Patricia Lane hailed the ruling as a victory for accountability, vowing to pursue similar cases aggressively. "Today, we send a clear message," she declared. "No one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it." Yet, even as justice triumphed in this particular case, the road ahead remained fraught with challenges. Critics argued that punishing one bad apple wouldn't fix a rotten tree. "We need systemic change," said civil rights activist Jamal Carter during a televised panel discussion. Reforming policing practices, investing in community programs, addressing economic disparities, all of these are necessary to create lasting progress. Others echoed his sentiments, urging lawmakers to prioritize legislation aimed at increasing transparency and reducing bias within law enforcement agencies. In response, politicians scrambled to introduce bills targeting systemic issues. One proposal called for mandatory de-escalation training for all officers, while another sought to establish independent oversight boards to investigate misconduct. Lawmakers also pushed for increased funding for mental health services and education initiatives in underserved communities, recognizing that crime prevention required more than just arrests. While these efforts sparked hope among advocates for reform, skeptics questioned whether they would translate into meaningful action. "Talk is cheap," said journalist Rachel Kim in an op-ed piece. "Until we see tangible results, promises of change ring hollow." Amidst the chaos, Marcus Thompson and Lisa Chen forged ahead with their mission to transform policing. Together, they launched a nationwide initiative called Bridging the Divide, aimed at fostering trust between law enforcement and minority communities. The program included workshops on cultural sensitivity, role-playing exercises to simulate real-world scenarios, and town hall meetings where citizens could voice concerns directly to officers. Early feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with participants praising the program's emphasis on empathy and understanding. For Marcus, leading this charge was deeply personal. Each workshop reminded him of the night he was arrested, the fear, the anger, the helplessness, but also the hope that followed. He often shared his story with attendees, using it as a teaching tool to illustrate the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. "I'm not here to point fingers or assign blame," he told a group of cadets during one session. I'm here to remind you of your responsibility to serve and protect all members of your community, regardless of their race, gender, or background. Lisa, too, poured her energy into the initiative, traveling across the country to train officers and build connections with local leaders. Her presence commanded respect, not because of her newfound fame, but because of her unwavering commitment to fairness. She often stayed late after sessions, answering questions and listening to stories from both officers and citizens. Change starts with conversation, she liked to say. If we can learn to see each other as human beings first, then maybe we can start building bridges instead of walls. As months turned into years, the impact of their work became evident. Crime rates dropped in cities that implemented bridging, the divide programs, thanks in part to improved relationships between police, and the impact of the FBI director's arrest and the subsequent fallout continued to reverberate across the nation, shaping conversations about race, justice, and reform in ways no one could have predicted. It wasn't just a single incident anymore. It had become a symbol, a rallying cry for those demanding change, and a cautionary tale for institutions resistant to accountability. For Marcus Thompson, life after the ordeal was a delicate balancing act. He was still the head of the FBI, responsible for leading one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the world, but he was also now a public figurehead for a movement seeking to dismantle systemic racism within policing. Marcus carried the weight of this dual role with quiet determination. Each morning, as he prepared for another day at headquarters, he reminded himself why he had chosen this path in the first place. The FBI wasn't just an organization, it was a promise to protect and serve all Americans equally. Yet the events of that fateful night had exposed how far the country still had to go in fulfilling that promise. Every decision Marcus made moving forward was informed by his experience. Whether it was implementing new training protocols or advocating for legislative reforms, he approached his work with renewed purpose, knowing that his actions could either inspire progress or perpetuate stagnation. One of the biggest challenges Marcus faced was navigating the internal politics of the FBI. Not everyone in the agency shared his vision for reform. Some senior officials viewed his outspoken stance on racial issues as divisive, arguing that it undermined the Bureau's reputation for impartiality. Others worried that focusing too much on social justice would distract from core missions like counterterrorism and cybercrime. But Marcus refused to back down. He believed that addressing systemic inequities wasn't a distraction. It was essential to ensuring the FBI remained relevant and effective in a rapidly changing society. To bridge these divides, Marcus organized a series of town hall meetings within the Bureau, inviting agents at every level to share their thoughts and concerns. These sessions weren't always easy. Some discussions grew heated, with agents clashing over topics like affirmative action and implicit bias, but they were necessary. Marcus knew that meaningful change required buy-in from everyone, not just those already aligned with his views. By fostering open dialogue, he hoped to create a culture where accountability and empathy went hand in hand. Meanwhile, Officer Lisa Chen continued to navigate her newfound role as a champion for reform. Her promotion to detective brought new responsibilities, but she remained deeply committed to the cause that had defined her career. Alongside Marcus, she traveled across the country, delivering workshops and speaking at conferences about the importance of cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. She often recounted her experience intervening during Marcus's arrest, emphasizing that courage didn't require grand gestures. It simply meant doing what was right, even when it was hard. Lisa's message resonated with many, especially younger officers eager to redefine what it meant to wear a badge. At one workshop in Chicago, a rookie cop named Jamal approached her after the session ended. "I want to make a difference," he said earnestly, "but sometimes it feels like I'm fighting against the system itself." Lisa nodded sympathetically. "You're not alone," she replied. "Change doesn't happen overnight, and it definitely doesn't happen without resistance. But every time you choose integrity over convenience, you chip away at the walls, holding us back." Her words stuck with Jamal, inspiring him to take small but significant steps toward reform. When he witnessed a fellow officer using inappropriate language during a traffic stop, He reported it instead of looking the other way. When community members expressed distrust during neighborhood patrols, he listened to their concerns and worked to address them. Though his efforts might have seemed minor compared to larger systemic changes, they mattered. They showed that individuals could influence the system, even if only incrementally. Back in Washington, D.C., Deputy Richard Hayes's incarceration served as a grim reminder of the consequences of unchecked power. His trial had been a media spectacle, drawing attention not just to his actions but to the broader patterns of misconduct plaguing law enforcement. Journalists dissected his case, uncovering troubling details about similar incidents involving other officers who had avoided accountability due to lack of evidence or institutional protection. This scrutiny forced police departments nationwide to reevaluate their policies and practices, prompting some to implement stricter oversight measures. Yet, Hayes's imprisonment also sparked debate about rehabilitation versus punishment. Was locking him up enough to prevent future abuses? Or did the focus need to shift toward addressing the root causes of such behavior? Things like inadequate training, toxic workplace cultures, and societal biases. Advocacy groups argued that true reform required tackling these underlying issues, rather than simply punishing individual offenders. "We can't incarcerate our way out of this problem," said Dr. Elena Martinez, a sociologist specializing in criminal justice reform. "If we want lasting change, we have to invest in prevention." In response, some cities launched pilot programs aimed at identifying and addressing early warning signs of misconduct among officers. These initiatives included psychological evaluations, peer review systems, and anonymous reporting mechanisms for citizens to flag problematic behavior. While critics dismissed these efforts as too little, too late, supporters hailed them as crucial first steps toward creating a more transparent and accountable system. As the months passed, the momentum for reform began to spread beyond law enforcement. Activists seized the opportunity to push for broader societal changes, recognizing that policing was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Campaigns advocating for affordable housing, access to quality education, and economic opportunities gained traction, fueled by the understanding that crime prevention required addressing its root causes. Politicians, eager to capitalize on the growing demand for action, introduced bills targeting systemic inequality in areas like healthcare, employment, and voting rights. For Marcus and Lisa, watching these developments unfold was both gratifying and humbling. Their initiative, Bridging the Divide, played a key role in driving this momentum, providing a framework for collaboration between law enforcement and marginalized communities. Cities that adopted the program saw tangible improvements, not just in police-community relations but in overall quality of life. Crime rates dropped, trust increased, and residents reported feeling safer and more empowered to engage with local authorities. But despite the progress, challenges remained. Resistance to reform persisted, particularly in regions where entrenched power structures were slow to adapt. Some police unions fought back against proposed changes, arguing that increased oversight would hinder officers' ability to do their jobs effectively. Others claimed that the focus on racial bias ignored legitimate concerns about rising crime rates and overstretched resources. These arguments highlighted the complexity of the issue, underscoring the need for nuanced solutions that balanced accountability with practicality. Amidst the ongoing debates, Marcus and Lisa found solace in the stories of transformation they encountered along the way. In Detroit, a former gang member turned youth mentor credited the program with helping him rebuild his life. In Los Angeles, a veteran officer described how participating in a Bridging the Divide workshop had changed the way he interacted with residents, making him more approachable and empathetic. And in Atlanta, a young girl wrote a letter thanking Marcus and Lisa for giving her hope that she could grow up in a world where fairness prevailed. These moments reminded them why they kept pushing forward, even when the odds felt insurmountable. Change was messy, imperfect, and often painfully slow, but it was possible. And while the road ahead would undoubtedly be long and fraught with obstacles, Marcus and Lisa remained steadfast in their belief that progress was worth fighting for. Years later, historians would look back on this period as a turning point, a moment when the nation confronted its flaws and began the arduous process of healing. Textbooks chronicled the events in detail, highlighting the courage of individuals like Marcus and Lisa, who refused to stay silent. Their names became synonymous with resilience and determination, inspiring generations to come. Yet even as society moved forward, questions lingered. Could trust truly be rebuilt between communities and those sworn to protect them? Would systemic racism ever be eradicated, or was it destined to persist in new forms? These uncertainties underscored the complexity of the journey ahead. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of that fateful night wasn't just the outcome, it was the reminder that even in darkness, light could shine through. And sometimes, that light came from unexpected places, illuminating paths toward a better tomorrow. As the months turned into years, the ripple effects of FBI Director Marcus Thompson's arrest continued to shape the nation in profound and lasting ways. What had begun as a single act of injustice on a quiet street in Washington, D.C., evolved into a catalyst for sweeping reforms that touched nearly every corner of American society. The story of that fateful night became more than just a headline. It was a chapter in history, one that marked both the failures and triumphs of a country grappling with its identity. Marcus Thompson, now a household name, carried the weight of his experience with grace and determination. Though he remained the head of the FBI, his role extended far beyond managing operations or overseeing investigations. He had become a symbol of resilience, a living testament to the idea that even those in positions of power were not immune to systemic inequities. Yet Marcus refused to let himself be defined solely by the incident. Instead, he channeled his energy into creating tangible change, using his platform to advocate for policies that would prevent others from enduring similar experiences. One of Marcus's most significant contributions came through the expansion of Bridging the Divide, the initiative he co-founded with Officer Lisa Chen. What had started as a small-scale program aimed at improving police-community relations blossomed into a nationwide movement. Cities across the United States adopted the model, tailoring it to fit their unique needs while maintaining its core principles: empathy, accountability, and collaboration. Workshops brought together officers and residents, encouraging them to share their perspectives and find common ground. Role-playing exercises allowed participants to step into each other's shoes, fostering understanding and breaking down barriers built over decades of mistrust. The results were remarkable. In cities like Chicago, where tensions between law enforcement and minority communities had long simmered, crime rates began to drop. Not because of harsher policing tactics, but because of stronger relationships. Residents felt more comfortable reporting suspicious activity, knowing they wouldn't face judgment or retaliation. Officers, in turn, learned to approach situations with patience and respect, reducing escalations that could lead to violence. Even skeptics who had initially dismissed the program as naive or impractical admitted that something was working. Crime wasn't eliminated entirely, but the atmosphere had shifted. There was less fear and more cooperation. Lisa Chen, too, found herself transformed by the journey. Her decision to intervene during Marcus's arrest had thrust her into the spotlight, but she never sought fame or recognition. For Lisa, the true reward lay in seeing the impact of her actions. She traveled tirelessly, speaking at conferences, training officers, and meeting with community leaders. Along the way, she inspired countless individuals to take a stand against injustice, proving that courage didn't require grand gestures. It simply meant doing what was right, even when it was hard. One of Lisa's proudest moments came during a visit to Atlanta, where she met a group of high school students participating in a youth leadership program. The students, many of whom hailed from underserved neighborhoods, were learning about civic engagement and conflict resolution. When Lisa shared her story, the room fell silent. Afterward, a young girl named Maya approached her, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I want to be like you when I grow up," she said softly. "I want to help people feel safe." Lisa knelt down to meet Maya's gaze, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You already are helping people," she replied. "Every time you speak, every time you show kindness, you're making a difference. You don't have to wait until you're older to start changing the world. Maya nodded, wiping her eyes. And Lisa knew she had planted a seed, a spark of hope that might one day grow into something extraordinary. Back in Washington, D.C., Deputy Richard Hayes's incarceration served as a sobering reminder of the consequences of unchecked power. His 3-year sentence passed in relative obscurity, though occasional news reports surfaced detailing his struggles to adjust to life behind bars. By the time he was released, Hayes was a changed man, or so he claimed. During an interview with a local journalist, he expressed remorse for his actions, acknowledging that he had let prejudice cloud his judgment. "I made a mistake," he admitted. "A big one, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends." Whether Hayes truly believed these words or was simply attempting to rebuild his reputation remained unclear, but his case underscored an important truth: accountability mattered. Punishing individual offenders wasn't enough to dismantle systemic racism, but it sent a powerful message that no one, regardless of rank or title, was above the law. This principle became a cornerstone of the broader reform efforts sweeping the nation, inspiring lawmakers to introduce legislation aimed at increasing transparency and reducing bias within law enforcement agencies. At the federal level, Attorney General Patricia Lane spearheaded several landmark initiatives designed to address systemic inequities. One bill mandated the use of body cameras for all law enforcement officers, ensuring that interactions with the public were documented and reviewable. Another established independent oversight boards tasked with investigating allegations of misconduct, free from departmental influence. Still another allocated funding for mental health services and community programs, recognizing that crime prevention required addressing root causes like poverty and lack of opportunity. These measures faced resistance, particularly from groups wary of increased regulation. Some argued that such reforms placed undue burdens on officers, hindering their ability to perform their duties effectively. Others claimed that the focus on racial bias ignored legitimate concerns about rising crime rates and overstretched resources. Despite these criticisms, the bills gained widespread support, passing with bipartisan backing and signaling a rare moment of unity in an otherwise divided political landscape. For activists, however, legislative victories were only part of the equation. True progress required sustained effort, both at the grassroots level and within institutions. Community organizations launched campaigns aimed at educating citizens about their rights and empowering them to hold authorities accountable. Social media played a crucial role, amplifying voices that might otherwise have gone unheard. Hashtags like Teachum Accountability, Now and Tachi Justice for All trended regularly, drawing attention to ongoing issues and mobilizing supporters to demand action. Even Hollywood got involved, producing films and documentaries inspired by real-life stories of resilience and reform. One movie titled Breaking the Blue Wall chronicled Marcus Thompson's arrest and the subsequent push for change, earning critical acclaim and sparking renewed interest in the movement. Celebrities used their platforms to raise awareness, hosting fundraisers and partnering with advocacy groups to amplify marginalized voices. Slowly but surely, the narrative shifted, from viewing incidents like Marcus's as isolated tragedies to recognizing them as symptoms of deeper societal ills. Yet, amidst the progress, challenges persisted. Not every city embraced reform with open arms. In rural areas, where resources were scarce and skepticism ran high, resistance to change remained entrenched. Some police departments dragged their feet, implementing reforms half-heartedly or finding loopholes to avoid compliance. Others outright rejected calls for accountability, doubling down on traditional methods that prioritized authority over empathy. Marcus understood these obstacles all too well. He often reminded himself, and others, that change was messy, imperfect, and painfully slow. "We're not going to fix everything overnight," he said during a speech at a national law enforcement conference. "But we can't let setbacks discourage us. Every step forward counts, no matter how small." His words resonated deeply, earning applause from the audience. Among those listening intently was Lisa Chen, who smiled proudly as she watched Marcus deliver his message with characteristic poise and passion. Together, They represented the best of what humanity could achieve when individuals chose courage over complacency, compassion over cruelty. Years later, as historians reflected on this period, they recognized it as a turning point, a moment when the nation confronted its flaws and began the arduous process of healing. Textbooks chronicled the events in detail, highlighting the courage of individuals like Marcus and Lisa, who refused to stay silent. Their names became synonymous with resilience and determination, inspiring generations to come. Yet even as society moved forward, questions lingered. Could trust truly be rebuilt between communities and those sworn to protect them? Would systemic racism ever be eradicated, or was it destined to persist in new forms? These uncertainties underscored the complexity of the journey ahead. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of that fateful night wasn't just the outcome, it was the reminder that even in darkness, light could shine through, and sometimes that light came from unexpected places, illuminating paths toward a better tomorrow. For Marcus and Lisa, the work was far from over. They continued to push for progress, knowing that the road ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles. But they also knew that every challenge presented an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to build a future where justice prevailed for all. And as they stood side by side, facing whatever lay ahead, they did so with unwavering hope and unshakable resolve. The years that followed the arrest of FBI Director Marcus Thompson marked a transformative era in American history, an era defined not just by what had happened, but by how people chose to respond. The incident, once a shocking headline, had evolved into a symbol of resilience and reform, inspiring individuals and communities to confront deeply rooted inequities. Yet, as with any journey toward progress, the path was neither smooth nor straightforward. Challenges persisted, victories were hard-fought, and setbacks tested the resolve of even the most steadfast advocates for change. Marcus Thompson, now older and grayer but no less determined, continued to lead the charge for justice. His role as FBI director ended after a decade of service, but his influence extended far beyond the walls of headquarters. Retirement did not mean retreat. Instead, it allowed him to focus entirely on his passion for reform. He founded the Thompson Institute for Justice and Equity, a nonprofit organization dedicated to addressing systemic racism and fostering trust between law enforcement and marginalized communities. Through research, advocacy, and community engagement, the Institute became a beacon of hope, offering practical solutions to some of society's most pressing issues. One of Marcus's proudest achievements was the creation of a national database tracking police misconduct. Modeled after similar systems used in other countries, the platform collected anonymized data on complaints, disciplinary actions, and court rulings involving officers across the United States. This transparency held departments accountable, ensuring that patterns of abuse could no longer be ignored or swept under the rug. Critics argued that the database infringed on officers' privacy, but supporters hailed it as a critical step toward rebuilding public confidence in law enforcement. Lisa Chen, meanwhile, rose through the ranks to become one of the most respected figures in policing. Her promotion to Chief of Police in Washington, D.C. made headlines, with many hailing her appointment as proof that true leadership stemmed from integrity and empathy. Under her command, the department implemented groundbreaking policies aimed at reducing bias and promoting accountability. Officers underwent regular psychological evaluations, peer review panels reviewed use of force incidents, and citizens were invited to participate in quarterly forums to voice concerns directly to leadership. These initiatives earned Lisa widespread praise, though they also drew criticism from those resistant to change. Despite the backlash, Lisa remained steadfast in her mission. She often reminded herself and others that progress required sacrifice. "Change is uncomfortable," she said during a keynote address at a national policing conference. "It forces us to confront our flaws, to admit when we're wrong, and to work harder to do better. But if we can embrace discomfort, we can create something truly meaningful." Her words resonated deeply, earning standing ovations from audiences who saw her as a trailblazer. Among her admirers was Jamal Carter, the young officer she had inspired years earlier during a workshop in Chicago. Now a sergeant, Jamal had dedicated himself to mentoring rookies, teaching them the importance of cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. When asked about his mentor, Jamal smiled warmly. Lisa showed me that being a cop isn't just about wearing a badge, it's about serving humanity. She taught me that real strength comes from compassion. As reforms took hold, their impact began to ripple outward, transforming not just policing but society as a whole. Cities that embraced bridging the divide reported significant improvements, not just in crime rates but in overall quality of life. Residents felt safer walking their streets knowing they wouldn't face harassment or hostility from officers. Businesses thrived as neighborhoods revitalized, attracting investment and creating jobs. Schools benefited too, with students excelling academically in environments free from fear and tension. These successes proved that investing in equity wasn't just morally right, it was economically smart. Yet challenges remained. In rural areas where resources were scarce and skepticism ran high, resistance to reform persisted. Some sheriffs refused to adopt new policies, claiming they undermined traditional methods of law enforcement. Others argued that increased oversight stifled officers' ability to make split-second decisions in dangerous situations. These debates highlighted the complexity of the issue, underscoring the need for tailored approaches that balanced accountability with practicality. Even in urban centers, progress was uneven. While major cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago saw dramatic improvements, smaller municipalities struggled to keep pace. Limited funding, political infighting, and entrenched power structures hindered efforts to implement meaningful reforms. Activists responded by organizing grassroots campaigns, pressuring local governments to prioritize equity and justice. Social media played a crucial role, amplifying voices that might otherwise have gone unheard, and mobilizing supporters to demand action. For Marcus and Lisa, watching these developments unfold was both gratifying and humbling. They knew that systemic racism was a deeply entrenched problem, one that couldn't be solved overnight. But they also believed that every small victory brought them closer to their ultimate goal, a world where fairness prevailed for all. Their partnership, forged in the crucible of adversity, became a model for collaboration. Together they demonstrated that bridging divides required not just policy changes but personal connections, listening, learning, and working side by side. Years later, as historians reflected on this period, they recognized it as a turning point, a moment when the nation confronted its flaws and began the arduous process of healing. Textbooks chronicled the events in detail, highlighting the courage of individuals like Marcus and Lisa, who refused to stay silent. Their names became synonymous with resilience and determination, inspiring generations to come. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of that fateful night wasn't just the outcome. It was the reminder that even in darkness, light could shine through. And sometimes that light came from unexpected places, illuminating paths toward a better tomorrow. For Marcus, the lesson was clear. We are stronger together than we are apart. Our differences don't divide us. They define us. If we can embrace that truth, there's nothing we can't overcome. Lisa echoed this sentiment, often reminding herself of the young girl she had met in Atlanta, the one who dreamed of making a difference. Maya reminded me why we do this work, she said during an interview. It's not for recognition or accolades. It's for the next generation, for kids like Maya who deserve to grow up in a world where justice is real, not just a promise. As they looked to the future, Marcus and Lisa knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles, but they also knew that every challenge presented an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to build a future where everyone felt safe, valued, and respected. And as they stood side by side, facing whatever lay ahead, they did so with unwavering hope and unshakable resolve. The story of FBI Director Marcus Thompson's arrest at gunpoint by a racist police officer didn't end with handcuffs or headlines. It ended, or rather continued, with ordinary people doing extraordinary things. It ended with courage, compassion, and a shared belief that change was possible. And though the journey was far from over, the destination, a fairer, more just society, felt closer than ever before.